Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Ghosts and Spirits special edition video. Well, this is yet another video chronicling one of my latest trips throughout Texas, either gearing up for Comic-Con stuff or more for this year, finding and focusing on a lot of haunted locations within either Central Texas, Northern Texas, or in this case of this video, Southern Texas. And it has to do with a beautiful ship that I visited a couple of weeks back called the USS Lexington, located there in Corpus Christi. First time I have ever been to that ship. It's always something that I wanted to do, so what better way to do so than with a trip like this, where not only am I focusing on hauntings and ghosts, but also I get to see a lot of history, beautiful history tied to, in this case, this ship, and then all the occurrences that seem to happen there. So very fascinating stuff. If you haven't had a chance to see the USS Lexington, if you're in Texas now, or if you plan on going there anytime soon, I highly recommend it. You have to travel all the way south to Corpus Christi, and then when you get there, it's very, very easy to find. It's pretty much the number one tourist location within Corpus Christi. It was surprising to see too that the parking there was phenomenal. I mean, literally, I thought that I would have to park, like, let's say, blocks and blocks away, but no, there's a lot of easy parking nearby. The museum is very cheap too to attend to, usually around 11 to 14 bucks, and you get to go there by yourself if you want, like, in other words, a self-guided tour. Or if you want to pay a little more, they're a little bit pricier, you can get an actual guided tour which takes you throughout many other parts of the ship that are usually, I guess, closed off to the general public. But you don't have to do, I don't recommend the VIP type tours, because in of itself, visiting this USS Lexington, it is humongous. You're going to see a whole assortment of pictures within this video. I'm going to try to cram them as much as I can and make them as fast as possible. And on top of that, I believe I actually caught a ghost, and I'll focus on that here in a few minutes. I'll dedicate a good portion of that video just to that one photo and highlight what I mean. So again, the USS Lexington there in Corpus Christi. Now, just a brief history of the actual ship itself. It was commissioned, obviously, during World War II, during the heyday of it, back whenever the Japanese were attacking, and then it was time to attack back. So this ship was commissioned somewhere around, I believe it was 1943 or so, and it was there in war for about a short time period, only about 2 years in terms of the actual World War II. After that war effort, then it was pretty much sent off to various locations. Like, I was reading an article that stated for about another 5 years, from 1947 to 1952, it was stationed in San Diego, California, mainly in terms of some kind of fleet operations. And then for the majority of its life thereafter, from 1962 to 1990, it was stationed in Pensacola, Florida, as a type of training aircraft. So a very long history for the ship. From the early 40s all the way to 1990, it was in some form of active naval operations. Finally, in 1990, it was decommissioned, and somehow, I guess, it was decided Corpus Christi would house this ship. It's been permanently anchored, I guess you could call it, or harbored within that area, and that's it. To this very day, it is still there, a very touristy location too, because a lot of people were there, hundreds, I would imagine, during that time period, and it still is pretty popular to visit. So glad to go see it again. Highly recommend it. Also, there's so many levels to see within the ship just with the regular ticket. You have, I guess, the main area when you walk in, which is below the flight deck. That'll stretch you all the way from left to right. So much stuff to see. And then you have if I remember correctly, two bottom floors underneath that you can visit. Each of them again stretching all the way from the left side of the ship to the right side of the ship. So fascinating too to see all the wonderful, wonderful rooms within the bottom levels. You can totally tell that not a single space was wasted when it comes to the development of these ships. Every single room was used for one purpose or other. Nothing was left just to sit by idly, in other words. So imagine in its heyday when you had thousands of people on board this ship, the type of activity that it had. So going throughout and spending, I think I must have spent about close to 4 to 5 hours, probably closer to the 5 hour side between all the levels. You will not, let's say, get bored. One quick note though, it is not for the faint of heart when it comes to exercise here. You do absolutely have to climb a bunch of stairs, climb down a bunch of stairs, walk to a bunch of tight, cramped areas, and also you have to do this within all the humidity there within Corpus Christi. So imagine it's humid outside, and then inside the ship with much of the area not air conditioned, then you can see that it becomes a really hot and sweltering place. So if let's say your health may not be top notch, I do not recommend going to the bottom levels, but thankfully the ship does allow you to go to the entrance level and then to the top flight deck very easily, so you do have those options too. So overall total about 4 levels. You have the very, very top flight deck, and then you have the entrance level just underneath it, and then you have the 2 floors underneath that as well. Now let's talk about the actual hauntings themselves and what people have reported, and the whole reason essentially why I went to it. During those years that this ship was operations, in particular during World War II, there was a lot of deaths that occurred within the USS Lexington. Some of the deaths occurred from the attacks themselves. There was kamikaze attacks that happened very frequently during World War II. A lot of people think that the kamikaze attacks took place from the air, like the famous movies make it seem, where they pretty much have an airplane spiraling down towards a ship. That did happen, but there was an area within the ship where I learned a little history, and it said some of the kamikaze attacks actually happened from self-manned torpedoes. Like the Japanese actually had torpedoes where they would put 2 men within them, and the way the torpedoes were made, where they were allowed to be operated by those men, and it was just pretty much a one-way trip, because once those torpedoes, the whole idea was during the heyday of a battle, they would be sent off to the ship, and then they would essentially explode right there wherever they hit the ship, of course taking the lives of the Japanese men, but the idea was they would also try to take as much lives of the sailors there within the USS Lexington. So some people did die there too. There were also people that died from the planes as far as the bullets too. There were reports as well that people died from being torpedoed by Japanese subs. I believe it was in the engine room that's where a bunch of the deaths happened, because the USS Lexington was hit by some of the torpedoes by Japanese sub, and I think that's where it happened. Even other sailors within the USS Lexington burned to death because there was a plane that crashed. I believe it was on the top flight deck, and when that happened, some of them burned, and then it ended up going to the engine room, if I remember correctly, the history of it. And then overall, also, there were some men that died just by plane accidents. Whenever you have a huge ship like this, and then a lot of moving parts, especially towards the engine room, there is definitely going to be some accidents when you involve some cramped spaces, very, very unforgiving spaces too. As I was mentioning a couple minutes earlier, how there's not a single area that's left untouched. Like everything is there for a reason. You'll see in those pictures that whenever you have a lot of those moving parts, especially in the engine room, that can lead to disaster. And then on top of that, there was reports of men dying from illnesses, only because here you have a situation where it's pretty much an isolated city, and when one person gets violently sick, let's say, for example, very, very horrific case of the flu or some other type of disease, well, that'll spread to the next person. And if that next person isn't as strong, if their health isn't as strong, then they could die too. So doing a little bit of history, it turns out that over 350 men ended up dying on the USS Lexington. A lot of them because of the being war casualties, but a lot of others, again, from accidents and illnesses. So here are some of the hauntings that people stated occurred with, or continue to occur within the actual ship. Apparently, a chief petty officer, this is one of the guys that died by accident, he inadvertently stepped into a propeller. Very unfortunate, horrific way to die, obviously. And because of that, apparently people state that they see his ghost, or they see whatever type of entity he is, up there on the flight deck reliving that particular moment. It's just a residual haunting, I guess you could call it. So that's one of the known hauntings. Another one is the fact that in the switch room, people report that in certain areas of the switch room, people feel sick. Like they actually, especially if they're very sensitive to this type of stuff, like they start feeling ill. Like whatever happened to some of the men there way back when, whatever tragedy it was, it is now affecting the current people, the tourists in particular. And so because of it, they feel nauseous, they feel sick, they feel ill, and so they have to take a little break too. There was an incident also that took place where some painters there, I don't know what part of the ship it was, but they were painting an area. By the way, I mean, obviously, you've seen some of these pictures. A lot of areas look new, like a lot of fresh paint. That definitely stood out. So imagine these painters doing their work most likely at night because that's when the ship is closed. And when the way the report stated, whenever they were painting a certain area of the ship, it wasn't finished yet, but they took a little break, I guess maybe a lunch break or something, and when they came back, they saw that that area that wasn't finished now was finished. So somebody or something actually painted the rest of the room for them. Another report seems to be from an employee of the museum, an acting deputy director. He said that often at night, I guess either he's in an area where he's isolated or he's in an area where things are closing up, who knows, but he hears the movement of clothing behind him, the sound of footsteps, and when he turns around, no one is there either. Now as far as visual appearances, some of the tourists especially have stated that they sometimes see a Japanese pilot, one of the kamikaze pilots, roaming around that area too, I guess where they died at the moment of attack. And also they see one of the Navy personnel as well, and sometimes they see them together because it seems to be the idea that one took the life of the other. It was either the American taking the life of the Japanese or vice versa, and in some cases they actually see each other and they stare at each other. Another entity that apparently wanders that area, especially in the engine room, happens to be somebody called a blue-eyed sail, like a naval officer, but he calls himself Charlie. Like that's the actual name that he says is his name, and he is so, I guess, powerful when it comes to his presence that when he makes his presence known, he actually looks like a real person. In other words, you don't see, as you would think, let's say the apparitions where it's half there, half not, you can see through it. No, in this case, it is a real person. In this case, it's as if you're looking at someone and not thinking for a moment that it's a ghost, that it's instead somebody really there. This person, Charlie, whoever he is, appears in front of visitors. He loves appearing in front of pretty young women too, and he will guide them throughout parts of the ship. Like he'll just suddenly be there and then state, this is a really interesting part of the ship, let me show you. Other people that have spent the night there on the ship, that's another thing too. I guess on certain occasions that ship will allow you to spend the night. So who would want to do that? I don't know, but some people they're really fascinating with that. They have signed up for it. But some people have stated that when they run around the ship at night, I could only imagine what it's like at night, because this place, it is humongous. There is an endless amount of hallways and doors to roam around. You can imagine at night, let's say you're in one of the bottom levels, all the lights are off. There's maybe some small residual lights just to allow you to roam around. There you are running around within the endless hallways and the endless darkness, and then you see this guy Charlie right in front of you. He has appeared in front of those people that have spent the night there. He introduces himself. He says his name is Charlie, and of course these people are scared. They're out of their minds, scared out of their minds out of what's occurring. But that seems to be a very frequent guest. Now, speaking of which, I wanted to say, as I mentioned a couple minutes back, I did check out this picture. I think I did capture something within the USS Lexington, in particular the engine room. That seems to be the most haunted location. I took a bunch of pictures of the engine room. You've been seeing them. It's pretty much the room that has a whole bunch of white equipment, like equipment that's painted white, very large tubes, very large vents, all of them painted white. This one, though, you'll have to look towards the top left hand corner, and then I'll circle it here. You'll notice what looks to be a white wispy mist of some sort going up towards whatever that black monitor is, towards the back. It's not glass, in terms of like a reflection of some sort, because you'll notice that mist goes across that black box, whatever that is there, and it stretches upwards and it goes behind that big gray bar that stands in front of it. So if this were, let's say, a glass reflection, then this would go, you could see it on top of whatever that gray bar is that's hanging downward. But no, in this case, it is going in front of that, whatever that black monitor is, and then it's going behind that black bar because it is truly behind it. So I was quite fascinated to see this. I looked at throughout all my pictures, and this is the only one that's where something stood out like this. I was taking a whole bunch of pictures, you probably noticed by now, of hallways, more hallways, corridors, corners, dark areas, just trying to see what could stand out, see if I could just capture something. But this one, in the actual engine room, you'll see that's where I captured this. And a proof again that this is not, let's say, some kind of reflection. You'll have to take my word for it, but in this engine room, it's very open, like where I was standing there in this picture. It's pretty much me. You'll see that bottom red bar. That was a set of staircases. I was standing up on top of it. There's nothing stopping me from, let's say, going even beyond further towards that black monitor in the back if I wanted to. Only just, not doing it. But otherwise, it's very open. So there's no glass enclosure. There's no reflection. Nothing of the kind. There's no spider webs either, because there are no spiders here in this room. It was pristine. The entire USS Lexington was absolutely pristine, kept in mint condition. I mean, it was amazing how clean it was. So it wouldn't have been a spider web either. So what this thing is, I have no idea, but it does look like it's a mist of some sort that is within that engine room. And I mentioned that too because other people that have taken pictures of the engine room, the very same engine room I'm in now, they have captured a strong misty-like experience too. So I think this is now finally the closest thing that I have to actual evidence of some kind of ghost picture of some sort. What this is, I don't know. 100% I can't prove it, but there's at least my indication that that is the real deal. But yes, it's good news because I was definitely looking forward to finally being able to capture something like that. So, all right, going more now towards more hauntings that happen within the ship. There's another person that's been seen, a chief petty officer. This one not so nice as Charlie. This is a guy that he, I guess, doesn't like, I guess, the tourist being there, doesn't like being disturbed, because he'll actually scowl at people. So much so that whenever, and you've seen some of the pictures of these mannequins that were propped in within some of the rooms, creepy looking things, right? But these mannequins, the way they look, people have actually mistaken this chief petty officer, whoever he is, of being next to them, as if being as real as one of those mannequins. So that's how eerie the sighting of this chief petty officer is. He's the one that seemingly backed up into that propeller that when I was mentioning a good number of minutes back. He's the one that seems to have done that. So that's why it seems like he's scowling so much, because he had an unfortunate death, and so now he has all these tourists around his area, and that's why he's not liking it. So another entity of some sort that seems to be roaming around the area is someone who likes to play little tricks of some sort. Whenever the area gets mopped, I don't know what area necessarily gets mopped, but whoever does that as the employee has mentioned that they've sighted single footprints coming out of a freshly mopped area, even though nobody was there other than the employee doing it, like doing the job. So who does that? Who knows? But it's somebody that's playing a little trick of some sort. Now, finally, to auditory, I guess, hauntings you could call it. People have heard voices, they have heard screams, they have heard cries, men crying, women in distress coming from the rooms. I tried to pay attention to that. It was a little hard because, as I mentioned, there was a lot of people there, and it was just constant hustle and bustle of tourists. So I wasn't really in a position where I could just stay in silence and then try to hear it. I imagine those people that can spend the night and go on those special tours, that those are the ones that can truly just spend hours just listening in silence, and then I had no doubt it's going to be very eerie, but no doubt they'll probably hear in the far corner like somebody screaming. Oh my goodness, if I were to hear something like that in the middle of the night just by myself, then that's it. I'm done. Like, I'm out. I don't care what happens. I'm out at that point. But that's what people seem to hear too. So very, very fascinating stuff. The USS Lexington. I hope you enjoyed all these pictures that I took. That's not even most of it. Like, I took almost 400 pictures in total. Here I was just presenting the stuff that I felt worked best towards my video about this Ghost and Spirit series. And again, highly recommended. If you're in Texas now, or if you're going to be in Texas in the future, by all means go see it. It's definitely worth the trip. So alright everybody, thanks again as always. Take care.